Fantasy Bedtime Stories presents Void Dragon Chronicles, Volume 1, Chapter 4. Lysandra, Fallen Stars. Please like, comment, and subscribe.
The great hall had never felt more like a tribunal. Father stood behind his desk, the formal family crest casting shadows across his face in the lamplight. Mother sat rigidly in her chair, her river of stars birthmark pulsing with agitated blue light, though none of us yet realized this was an early sign of the illness that would soon claim her. Aurora and I faced them across an expanse of polished wood that might as well have been an ocean. The massive oak desk, a family heirloom that had witnessed generations of difficult conversations, stood between us like a barricade. The letter from Aethermoor lay between us like an accusation, its official seals broken, its damning contents already absorbed. The parchment itself seemed to radiate disappointment, the formal letterhead bearing the institution's Crystal Mountain crest now looking like a monument to our failure. The Great Hall felt different than it had during my childhood visits to Father's study. The warmth had been sucked out of it, leaving behind only the cold weight of authority and judgment. Portraits of previous family heads gazed down from the walls with expressions that seemed more disapproving than usual. Even the magical illumination felt harsh, casting sharp shadows that made Father's face look carved from granite.
Suspended.
Father's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded storms. He spoke the word like a curse, each syllable weighted with centuries of family honor now tarnished.
Not disciplined, suspended. From the most prestigious magical institution in 3 kingdoms. They might as well expelled you.
I could feel Aurora trembling beside me, though whether from exhaustion, anger, or the after effects of void exposure, I couldn't tell. Her silver hair was still disheveled from our hurried journey home, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and magical strain. But her hunter's crown birthmark pulsed steadily with that disturbing violet-threaded gold, a visible reminder of how much she'd changed.
The experiment worked,
Aurora said, lifting her chin in defiance despite the exhaustion that lined her face. Her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before our expulsion, subtle but unmistakable.
We successfully created a stable dimensional window and gathered unprecedented observational data on void space dynamics. The theoretical implications alone.
You nearly destroyed the entire complex.
Father's composure shattered like glass, his own birthmark, the traditional golden crown of stars, blazing with righteous fury.
According to Archmagister Solandis, reality itself became unstable for 17 city blocks. Students were evacuated to emergency shelters. The damage to the Pearl Tower alone will take months to repair.
As Father's voice rose, I felt the temperature in the room actually drop. Frost began forming on the windows despite the season, a physical manifestation of his barely controlled rage. This wasn't just about the institution. This was about the public shame, the political ramifications, the way other families would view the Starweavers now that 2 of their heirs had been cast out in disgrace. Mother's hand pressed against her throat, and I noticed how her fingers trembled, another sign we should have recognized. Her river of stars birthmark, usually a steady flow of sapphire light across her collarbone, flickered erratically like a candle in a windstorm. The sight sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with Father's magical outburst.
Aurora, darling, they're saying you opened a breach to the void itself, deliberately. Is that true?
The gentle question somehow carried more weight than Father's fury. In Mother's voice, I heard not anger, but genuine fear, the kind of terror that came from understanding exactly what void exposure could do to a person. She had studied the histories, read the accounts of previous Starweavers who had walked Aurora's path. She knew how those stories ended. Aurora's defiant mask slipped, revealing the girl beneath who desperately wanted her parents' understanding. For a moment, she looked like the child she'd been, brilliant, curious, but still needing approval from those she loved most. The violet light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something more recognizably human.
It was controlled.
She insisted, her hands moving in the air as if she could still feel the magical patterns she'd woven that night.
Contained within the laboratory, the safety protocols I designed included 17 separate failsafes, each one tested and verified. The containment circles were perfectly calibrated for dimensional interface work. The resonance chambers created a stable buffer zone that
Your safety protocols failed the moment something from the other side took notice, I interrupted, my own anger finally breaking free. Aurora, you felt it too. That presence. The thing that tried to push through when it realized we were watching.
Even now, weeks later, I could feel phantom echoes of that encounter. My star-crowned birthmark began to pulse with agitated silver light as the memory triggered my enhanced perception. For those terrifying minutes in the laboratory, I had seen layers of reality stacked like transparent sheets, each showing different versions of our experiment, our fate, ourselves. In one glimpse, Aurora had been consumed entirely, transformed into something that wore her face but held no recognition in its eyes.
That wasn't malevolent contact.
Aurora said, but I heard the uncertainty creeping into her voice.
What we experienced was first communion with a form of consciousness that operates outside our normal parameters. Of course, it felt alien. It exists in a completely different dimensional framework than we do.
It was hungry, I said flatly, letting my enhanced perception focus on that night, reliving details I'd tried to suppress. I felt its attention fix on you the moment you opened the window. Not curiosity, hunger. It wanted something from you, Aurora, something specific. Father leaned forward, his expression shifting from anger to alarm.
What exactly did you encounter? The Archmagister's letter was deliberately vague about the specifics. Lysandra.
Father's attention turned to me like a spotlight, and I flinched under its intensity. His disappointment hit me like a physical blow, worse than any punishment he could have devised.
You were there! You participated in this madness. You were supposed to be her anchor, her voice of reason. Instead, you enabled the most reckless magical experimentation in recent family history.
The accusation hit harder than a physical blow because it was true. I had been there, stylus in hand, documenting every phase of Aurora's increasingly dangerous research. I had helped her calculate dimensional frequencies, assisted with containment protocols, even suggested modifications to her theoretical framework. When the crucial moment came, when I could have stopped her, should have stopped her, I had stepped back and let curiosity override caution. I tried to talk her out of it. I began, but the words sounded hollow even to me.
Did you?
Mother asked softly, and the disappointment in her voice was worse than Father's anger. Her eyes, normally so warm and understanding, held a distance I'd never seen before.
Because the report suggests you served as her observational assistant, that you helped document the very experiment that could have killed you both, that when the dimensional breach began to destabilize, you didn't seek help. You helped her contain it.
My throat tightened. The official report had been clinical, factual, devastating in its precision. It described in dry academic language how two Starweaver heirs had deliberately opened a window into void space, maintained it for 18 minutes, and nearly caused a catastrophic reality breach when something from the other side took interest in their activities. What it couldn't capture was the split-second decisions, the desperate improvisations, the way Aurora and I had worked together to collapse the window before whatever was pushing through could fully manifest. She needed an anchor, I said weakly. Without my perception to guide her back to baseline reality, she might have been pulled through entirely. I couldn't just abandon her to face that alone.
You weren't supposed to help her face it at all!
Father's voice cracked like thunder, and several books fell from their shelves as his power lashed out uncontrolled.
Your role as her moon was to prevent her from reaching that point, not to enable her when she did.
Aurora stepped forward, drawing attention back to herself. Her movements had that new quality I'd noticed since the experiment. Too fluid, as if she were navigating more dimensions than the rest of us could perceive.
Don't blame Lysandra. The decision was mine. The research was mine. She was just...
She was supposed to protect you from yourself.
Father slammed his hand on the desk, making the inkwells jump and sending droplets of black ink across the letter from Aethermoor like spots of blood.
That's what the moon birthmark means, Aurora. That's where the two of you were born together, raised together, trained together. Lysandra's gifts were meant to balance your impulses, not enable them.
The ancient oak desk creaked under the force of his blow, and I could see stress fractures forming in the wood, physical manifestations of the magical pressure radiating from Father's barely controlled fury. This wasn't just about one failed experiment. This was about the fundamental breakdown of everything our family structure was designed to prevent.
And what if my impulses are right?
Aurora shot back, her own power flaring visibly around her. The air around her shimmered with heat distortion, and I could smell the sharp ozone scent that accompanied high-level magical workings. The silver in her eyes swirled faster, and I could see traces of that dangerous violet light that had appeared during the experiment, the same color I'd glimpsed in the void space beyond her dimensional window.
What if the boundaries you're so desperate to maintain are actually limitations that prevent us from reaching our full potential? What if every Starweaver who's ever lived has been operating at a fraction of their true capability because we're too terrified to explore the full spectrum of magical reality?
As she spoke, her hunter's crown birthmark began to pulse in complex patterns I'd never seen before. The golden light was now consistently threaded with deeper hues. Violet, yes, but also colors that seemed to exist between normal wavelengths, shades that hurt to look at directly. Small objects in the room began to vibrate sympathetically with her emotional state. Books, inkwells, even the heavy wooden chairs. "You're already changing," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Aurora, can you hear yourself? The way you're speaking, the harmonics in your voice, it's not entirely human anymore." Mother rose slowly from her chair, and we all fell silent. Despite her growing fragility, which I now realized was more pronounced than I'd previously noticed, Lady Celeste Starweaver still commanded absolute respect when she chose to exercise it. But the effort of standing clearly cost her. I saw her grip the chair back for support, saw the way her breathing had become slightly labored. How had we missed these signs?
Aurora.
She said, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of diplomatic training, layered with the deeper power that came from her River of Stars birthmark. When she spoke in this tone, it carried undertones of ancestral wisdom, as if she were channeling the accumulated knowledge of every Starweaver who had come before.
You could have died. Worse, you could have been consumed, transformed into something unrecognizable. Do you understand what that would have done to us? To your sister? To our family?
The question hung in the air, and I felt the weight of generations pressing down on us. The Starweaver family had endured for over 1,000 years precisely because they had learned to recognize and avoid certain dangers. Aurora's research threatened not just her own safety, but the stability that had allowed our bloodline to survive when so many others had fallen to corruption or catastrophe.
I understand that everyone is so terrified of the void that they refuse to study it properly.
Aurora replied, but some of the fight had gone out of her voice. Her power flickered and dimmed as Mother's authority pressed against her defiance.
Mother, you've read the same historical texts I have. You know that dragon magic and void energy weren't always separate. The pre-sealing texts are quite clear about integrated practices. The first dragons didn't create that separation to protect us. They created it to control us.
Heresy.
Father said flatly, his voice cutting through the room like a blade.
Dangerous, seductive heresy that has led more promising young mages to corruption than any other single cause. Aurora, you're reciting the same arguments that every void-touched idealist has used to justify their transformation. Do you think you're the first brilliant Starweaver to believe they could safely walk this path?
He gestured toward a section of the wall where portraits of former family members hung in shadow. I knew those faces. Relatives who had been quietly removed from the main genealogy, whose names were whispered warnings rather than sources of pride. Each had been brilliant. Each had believed they could control forces beyond their understanding. Each had ultimately been lost to the hunger that lurked in the spaces between realities.
Is it heresy to question? To seek understanding rather than blind acceptance?
Aurora's voice rose again, passion overriding caution. Her birthmark blazed brighter, casting shifting shadows on the walls that seemed to move independently of her form.
The void breach at Aethermoor didn't happen because I was reckless. It happened because our understanding is incomplete. If we actually studied these forces instead of forbidding all contact with them, if we approached them with proper scientific methodology instead of superstitious fear,
If we studied them, we would all be dead or worse.
Father roared, his own birthmark now blazing with golden fire that made the room's magical illumination seem dim by comparison.
Aurora, the seals exist for a reason! The Void Wars ended in victory for reality itself! You're talking about undoing safeguards that have protected civilization for millennia! You're advocating for the systematic dismantling of everything our ancestors died to preserve!
The magical pressure in the room had become almost unbearable. Father's rage was manifesting as actual heat, making the air shimmer and dance. Aurora's void-touched energy created cold spots and reality distortions that made straight lines bend and shadows fall upward. Between them, Mother stood like a lighthouse in a storm, her diplomatic training the only thing preventing this argument from escalating into something that could literally tear the room apart.
I'm talking about evolution!
Aurora's birthmark blazed with golden light that was increasingly threaded with deeper hues. Not just violet now, but colors that existed in the spaces between normal perception.
About refusing to stagnate behind walls built by people who are too afraid to see past their own limitations. About recognizing that the artificial separation between dragon and void magic is exactly that, artificial.
I watched this escalating confrontation with growing horror, my enhanced perception allowing me to see the magical energies building to dangerous levels. This wasn't just about Aurora's experiment anymore. It was about fundamental differences in worldview that might be impossible to reconcile. Father saw preservation of order and safety, the hard-won wisdom of generations who had learned to recognize existential threats. Aurora saw stagnation and cowardice, the tragic waste of potential sacrificed to fear. And neither could understand how the other could be so blind to what seemed obvious. The air itself was beginning to crack under the pressure of their opposing energies. I could see hairline fractures forming in reality, not metaphorically but literally. The same kind of dimensional instability that had plagued Aurora's laboratory during the experiment was starting to manifest here, in our family home, as two powerful starweavers let their emotions override their control.
That's enough!
Mother said sharply, and again her voice cut through the argument like a blade. The diplomatic authority in her tone carried more than just personal will. It drew on the deep magic of her River of Stars birthmark, the pattern that connected her to the accumulated wisdom of every mediator and peacekeeper in our bloodline.
Both of you. This shouting accomplishes nothing.
The command rippled through the room with actual force, dampening the magical fires that Father and Aurora had been unconsciously building. But I could see what the effort cost Mother. Her already fragile form swayed, and she had to grip the back of her chair to remain upright. The River of Stars on her collarbone flickered erratically, its usual steady flow disrupted by whatever illness was draining her strength. She moved to stand between Father and Aurora, though the effort clearly cost her. Her steps were careful, measured, as if she were conserving energy for more important battles. Looking back, I wonder if she already felt the illness beginning to drain her strength more rapidly. If she knew her time for guidance was running shorter than any of us suspected, perhaps that knowledge drove her urgency now, the need to resolve this crisis before she could no longer serve as the family's mediating force.
Aurora, your father is right about the dangers.
She continued, her tone gentler but no less firm.
The void doesn't just corrupt magic, it corrupts judgment. The very act of studying it changes the researcher in ways that make objective assessment impossible. Every mage who has walked your path has been absolutely convinced they were right up until the moment they cease to be human.
She gestured toward a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. one I'd never paid much attention to before.
We have their journals, their research notes, their final testimonials. All brilliant minds, all certain they had found a way to safely integrate void energy. All ultimately consumed by forces they thought they understood.
Those researchers worked in isolation without proper theoretical frameworks or safety protocols.
Aurora argued, but her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction.
They were operating from incomplete data, making fundamental assumptions about void energy that my research has proven false. I've achieved stable integration, Mother. I've maintained consciousness and individual will while expanding my perceptual capabilities beyond anything our family has seen in generations.
Have you?
Mother asked, and the question carried layers of meaning that made Aurora step back.
Aurora, when you speak now, you use plural pronouns without realizing it. You refer to insights we have gained, perspectives we have achieved. Who is we, my brilliant daughter?
But what if they were right?
Aurora asked desperately.
What if we condemned them not because they were wrong, but because we were afraid of what they discovered?
Mother's expression was infinitely sad.
And what if they weren't? What if the price of being wrong is everything we've built, everyone we love, reality itself? Can you accept that responsibility?
The question hung in the air like smoke. I saw Aurora struggle with it, saw her absolute certainty waver for just a moment. But then her jaw set with familiar determination.
I can accept the responsibility of seeking truth instead of hiding behind comfortable lies,
She said quietly. Father made a sound of pure frustration.
Then you accept the responsibility for the consequences as well. Aurora, you are forbidden from conducting any further void research. Your laboratory access is revoked pending a full magical evaluation. Master Chen will examine you for signs of corruption, and if any are found...
No!
Aurora said, the word sharp as crystal.
I won't submit to purification rituals based on fear and ignorance.
It's not a request. You are my daughter. I will not watch you destroy yourself chasing phantoms and calling it progress.
Then maybe I'm not meant to be part of this family.
The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that seemed to reach every corner of the room. The magical illumination flickered as if the very lights recoiled from the statement. Mother actually staggered, one hand reaching out to steady herself against her chair. The river of stars on her collarbone went completely dark for a moment before flickering back to life with erratic, panicked pulses.
Aurora, no, you don't mean that.
But I could see in my sister's eyes that she did mean it, or thought she did. The experiment at Aethermoor had shown her something, given her a glimpse of possibilities that our family's traditions couldn't accommodate. And now she was being asked to pretend she'd never seen them, to return to the constraints of a worldview that felt impossibly narrow after touching the infinite.
I mean that I won't be caged.
Aurora said, her voice breaking slightly. The sound was heartbreaking. My brilliant, powerful sister reduced to this moment of desperate defiance.
I won't pretend that ignorance is safety, that stagnation is wisdom. If that makes me unsuitable as a Star Weaver heir, then perhaps...
Perhaps nothing, I said, finally finding my voice. The entire argument had been spiraling beyond any hope of resolution, and someone had to pull it back from the brink. My star-crowned birthmark flared with silver light as I drew on every bit of diplomatic training Mother had given me, every lesson in mediation and conflict resolution. Aurora, you're talking about abandoning everything, everyone you've ever loved because of one experiment, one glimpse of something you don't even fully understand. She turned to me, and I saw tears gathering in those transformed eyes that now held depths that seemed to extend beyond physical space. The violet flecks swirled like miniature galaxies, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman.
You don't understand, Lysa. What I saw, what I felt when that window opened, it wasn't chaos or corruption. It was potential. Pure, infinite potential waiting to be shaped by conscious will. And everyone here wants me to forget it exists.
We want you to survive it, I said simply, pouring all my love and fear into those words. Aurora, I was there. I felt that presence on the other side of your window. It wasn't benevolent. It wasn't neutral. It was hungry. And it was focused on you specifically. The memory of that encounter still sent chills through me. During those 18 minutes when the dimensional window had been open, I had perceived something vast and alien pressing against our reality, like a predator testing the bars of a cage. It had noticed Aurora's window, had begun pushing against it with increasing force, trying to widen the breach. And when it had focused its attention on my sister, I had felt its hunger, not for destruction, but for acquisition. It had wanted to add Aurora to itself, to make her part of something larger and incomprehensibly alien.
Because I'm the first person in generations brave enough to look it in the eye instead of hiding behind seals and prayers.
Aurora's voice rose, harmonics resonating through the room with enough force to make the windows vibrate.
Because I approached it with respect and scientific methodology instead of fear and superstition.
Or because you're the first person foolish enough to ring the dinner bell. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they needed to be said. Aurora, what if, just what if, the reason no one has successfully integrated void energy is because it's not meant to be integrated? What if the corruption everyone warns about is real, inevitable, and you're just the latest brilliant person to think they're special enough to avoid it? The question hit home. I saw Aurora flinch, saw doubt flicker across her features, like lightning in storm clouds. For a moment, the certainty that had carried her through months of dangerous research wavered. But then her jaw set with familiar determination, and the walls went back up.
What if you're wrong?
She countered, her voice steady despite the tears still threatening to fall.
What if everyone who's ever told us the void is evil was wrong? What if we're condemning ourselves to magical mediocrity because we're too cowardly to risk greatness? What if the very fear that's supposed to protect us is actually the thing that's keeping us from becoming what we're truly meant to be?
Then we'll have lived safe, peaceful lives surrounded by people we love, I said, my own voice breaking slightly. And if you're wrong, you'll have destroyed yourself and possibly taken the rest of us with you. Which risk seems more acceptable? The silence that followed was deafening. Father had gone rigid with shock at Aurora's threat to leave the family. Mother looked like she was barely holding herself upright, the effort of mediating this crisis clearly draining what little strength she had left. And Aurora, my brilliant, transformed, dangerous sister, stood at the center of it all, torn between the family she loved and the knowledge she couldn't unknow. Father was watching this exchange with growing alarm.
This is exactly what I was afraid of. Aurora, you're already changing. The way you think, the way you prioritize, even the way you speak, it's becoming infected with void influence. Can't you see that?
What I see is a family so terrified of change that they'd rather watch me suffocate than risk me growing beyond their understanding.
Aurora said with forced calm. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Father's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Mother spoke.
Is that really what you think of us?
She asked, and the hurt in her voice was unmistakable.
That we want to limit you out of petty fear. Aurora, we're terrified because we love you, because we've seen what happens to brilliant young mages who think they can control forces beyond their comprehension.
Have you? Or have you just read cautionary tales written by those who succeeded in consolidating power? Mother, you're too intelligent to accept official histories without question. Why won't you question this one?
Mother was quiet for a long moment, her hand pressed against her throat where her birthmark continued its agitated pulsing. When she spoke, her voice was very soft.
Because my brilliant daughter says some questions carry prices too high to pay for their answers. And because I would rather have you alive and limited than dead and enlightened.
The simple honesty of it seemed to deflate Aurora's anger. She slumped slightly, exhaustion and emotional strain finally taking their toll.
What happens now?
She asked, and for the first time since our return, she sounded like the sister I knew, rather than a stranger wearing her face. Father's expression softened slightly,
Now you submit to evaluation, not purification. Evaluation. Master Chen will examine you for signs of void influence and will determine how to proceed based on his findings.
And if he finds what you expect him to find?
Then we'll discuss treatment options, with your input and consent.
Father said carefully. It wasn't much of a guarantee, but it was something. Aurora looked at me, seeking guidance, or support, or simply acknowledgement that this conversation had spiraled far beyond what any of us had intended.
The experiment worked. For those few minutes, I had a direct window into void space. I proved that stable observation is possible.
She said quietly, as if this fact could somehow justify everything that had followed.
You proved that you're brilliant and reckless in equal measure. Aurora, no one has ever questioned your intelligence or your potential. But intelligence without wisdom is just elaborate self-destruction.
Father said, but there was more resignation than anger in his voice now.
And wisdom without curiosity is just elaborate stagnation.
Aurora replied, but the fight had gone out of her voice. Mother moved to embrace her, and after a moment's hesitation, Aurora melted into her arms like the child she had never really been allowed to be.
We love you,
Mother whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice.
whatever you've seen, whatever you think you understand, we love you. That has to be enough to build on.
I hope so. Because I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't pretend the possibilities don't exist.
Then we'll find a way to make peace with those possibilities. Together. As a family.
Aurora and I were dismissed with a gesture, leaving our parents alone in the great hall. As we walked through the corridors toward our chambers, I could feel the weight of everything that had just transpired settling over us like a shroud. I'm sorry, I said quietly. About mentioning the presents. I know you wanted to keep that part private, but Father needed to understand.
You did what you thought was right, just like you always do. Safe, careful, Lysandra, making sure everyone stays within acceptable boundaries.
Aurora interrupted, though I could hear the hurt in her voice. That's not fair, I protested. I helped you with the experiment. I risked everything to be your anchor when the window destabilized. How is that safe or careful? Aurora stopped walking, turning to face me. In the dim corridor lighting, the violet threads in her birthmark seemed to pulse with their own inner light.
You helped because you knew I'd do it anyway,
she said, her voice carrying those strange new harmonics.
You thought you could control it, contain it, keep it from going too far. But Lysa, there is no too far when seeking truth. There's only forward or stagnation.
There's also survival, I countered. There's keeping the people we love from being consumed by forces they don't fully understand. That presence I felt, Aurora, it wanted to use you, to hollow you out and wear you like a costume into our reality. Is that the evolution you're seeking?
You don't know that's what it wanted.
Aurora said, but uncertainty colored her words.
Fear shaped your perception, made you see threat where there might have been opportunity.
Maybe, I admitted. But maybe your hunger for knowledge shaped yours, made you see opportunity where there was only threat. We stood there in the corridor, two sisters divided by fundamental differences in how we saw the world. The experiment at Aethermoor had brought those differences into sharp relief, showing us both how far apart we'd grown despite our love for each other.
I won't stop, I can't, even if Father forbids it, even if the whole family stands against me.
Aurora said finally.
I've seen too much, felt too much. I know there's more to reality than what we've been taught, and I need to understand it.
I know, I said sadly, and I'll keep trying to anchor you, even when you make it impossible. Because that's what I do. That's who I am. Your moon, remember? Always reflecting your light, always trying to show you a different perspective.
My light is changing.
Aurora warned.
Becoming something that might be too bright for you to safely reflect.
Then I'll adapt, I said with more confidence than I felt. Or burn trying, because the alternative is losing you entirely, and that's not acceptable. Aurora's expression softened slightly.
You felt it too, during the experiment, the expansion, the possibilities. Don't tell me part of you doesn't want to experience that again.
She wasn't wrong. The brief taste of expanded perception had been intoxicating in its clarity, terrifying in its scope. Part of me did want to understand what Aurora was experiencing, to see reality through her transformed perspective. But the larger part, the part that had felt that hungry presence pressing against our world, knew that some doors should remain closed. I felt it, I admitted. And it scared me more than anything I've ever experienced. Because for those few minutes, I understood how easy it would be to let go. To stop being Lysandra and become something else. Something that wouldn't care about family or duty or the people I love. That's what terrifies me about your path, Aurora. Not that you'll fail, but that you'll succeed in becoming something that no longer remembers why being human mattered. Aurora was quiet for a long moment, absorbing my words. Then she reached out and took my hand, her skin noticeably cooler than normal, another change from the experiment.
I'll try to remember,
She said softly.
even when the whispers get loud, even when the possibilities seem infinite. I'll try to remember that being human, being your sister, being our parents' daughter, that these things have value too.
That's all I ask, I said, squeezing her hand. That you try to remember, and that you let me remind you when trying isn't enough. We parted then, each heading to our own chambers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed a threshold that night, that the confrontation with our parents had crystallized something that had been building since Aurora first began her void research. As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about 7 star weavers with the hunter's crown, all drawn to the same dangerous knowledge, all meeting terrible ends. Was Aurora destined to become the 8th? Or could we find a different path, one that honored her need for understanding without sacrificing her humanity? The following day, Mother's symptoms started to progress even worse. That morning during breakfast in the solarium, our family's traditional gathering place for morning meals, the space was Mother's creation, a harmony of architecture and nature, where spelled glass panels filtered sunlight into the precise spectrum that nourished both plants and people. I sat in my usual spot, working through a text on comparative magical theory while absently eating toast. I had developed what Father kindly called scholarly habits, and what Aurora teasingly termed an unhealthy relationship with books. The truth lay somewhere between. I found comfort in the written word, in knowledge that stayed constant on the page, unlike the shifting realities of magical practice. Aurora sat across from me, but she wasn't eating. She was watching Mother with that particular intensity she reserved for complex magical problems. I noticed her scrutiny and followed her gaze, trying to see what had captured my sister's attention. Mother looked tired. It was such a simple observation, but it struck me as wrong in a fundamental way. Celeste Starweaver didn't get tired. She managed the complex diplomatic relationships between magical houses, raised 2 daughters, supported Father's leadership of the family, and still found time to tend her gardens and pursue her own magical research. She did it all with a grace that made it seem effortless. But that morning, there were shadows under her eyes that her usual glamours couldn't quite conceal. Her river of stars birthmark, which normally flowed across her collarbone like liquid sapphire, seemed dulled, its light fitful rather than steady.
You're not eating.
Father observed, looking up from his correspondence. Even at breakfast, he was working, reviewing reports from various family holdings. But his attention to Mother never wavered, a constant awareness that spoke of 23 years of marriage.
I'm not particularly hungry.
Mother replied, setting down her teacup. That's when it happened, the moment that changed everything. Her hand trembled, just slightly, and the delicate porcelain slipped from her fingers. The cup fell in what seemed like slow motion. I watched, frozen, as it tumbled through the air, Mother's attempts to catch it somehow missing by fractions of inches. It struck the stone floor and shattered, the sound sharp and final in the morning quiet. Tea spread across the floor in a pattern that looked disturbingly like a divination casting, dark liquid seeping into the joints between stones.
Oh,
Mother said softly, staring at the broken porcelain with an expression of mild surprise.
how clumsy of me.
But it wasn't clumsiness. Mother had trained in the diplomatic arts, which included perfect physical control. She could balance a full tea service on one hand while casting complex magic with the other. She didn't drop things. Aurora was already moving, kneeling beside Mother's chair.
Let me.
She said. But instead of cleaning the spill, she cast a diagnostic charm, the soft blue light playing over Mother's form.
I'm perfectly fine.
Mother insisted, though her hands trembled as she attempted to collect the larger pieces of broken porcelain.
Just a moment of dizziness. The seasons are changing. It affects the magical currents.
Aurora's diagnostic charm faded, but not before I saw her eyes widen slightly at whatever it had revealed.
You've been dizzy a lot lately,
She said, her voice carefully controlled.
and your birthmark is fading.
Once pointed out, it was impossible to ignore. The river of stars pattern that had always been so vibrant now looked like a watercolor left in the rain, its edges blurring, its light uncertain. Mother sighed, finally allowing her composed mask to slip. She looked older suddenly, the glamours she habitually wore flickering to reveal fine lines around her eyes, a slight hollow to her cheeks that hadn't been there in the spring.
I've been seeing the healers.
She admitted, and my breakfast turned to ash in my mouth. Mother never saw healers. She was one of the most accomplished practitioners of biological magic in the family. If she was seeing healers, it meant she couldn't heal herself.
What kind of illness?
Aurora asked, abandoning all pretense of cleaning the spilled tea. The broken porcelain lay forgotten as we all focused on Mother.
They say it's complicated.
Mother replied, and I heard years of diplomatic training in that careful understatement. What kind of complicated? I asked, my voice small with sudden fear. The theoretical text on the table before me seemed suddenly trivial, its carefully ordered arguments meaningless in the face of this unexpected chaos. Mother's smile was gentle but tight with hidden pain.
The kind they don't yet understand, my little moon. But they're working on it. The best healers in 3 kingdoms have been consulted. There's no need for immediate worry.
But there was need for worry. I could see it in the way Father's hands had stilled on his papers, in the way Aurora's birthmark had begun to pulse with agitated golden light, in the way Mother herself couldn't quite meet our eyes. Aurora's jaw tightened in an expression I knew, well-determination crystallizing into action.
I want to see their research notes.
Mother laughed softly, reaching out to touch Aurora's cheek with visible affection.
My brilliant son, always thinking you can solve every puzzle. Some things are beyond even your considerable talents.
Nothing is beyond understanding if approached correctly.
Aurora said, and there was steel in her voice that made her sound older.
What are the symptoms? How did it begin? What treatments have been attempted?
Aurora? Your mother needs rest, not interrogation.
Father interrupted, but Mother raised a hand, stopping his protective intervention.
No, she has a right to know. You both do. It began 3 months ago. Fatigue that rest didn't cure. Small failures of magic that I initially attributed to distraction.
She settled back in her chair, seeming to gather strength for what followed.
Then the dizzy spells started, and I noticed my birthmark beginning to fade.
3 months. I repeated, hurt and bewilderment warring in my chest. You've been ill for 3 months and didn't tell us?
I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. I wanted the 2 of you to focus on your studies at Aethermoor.
Mother said.
The healers were confident it was a simple magical imbalance, easily corrected with time and treatment.
But it's not.
Aurora stated. It wasn't a question. Mother's silence was answer enough. The rest of breakfast passed in a blur. Father attempted to maintain normalcy, discussing the day's scheduled activities, but his words felt hollow. Aurora excused herself as soon as courtesy allowed, and I knew she was heading for the library. Mother retired to her chambers, assisted by Father, whose arm around her waist was both tender and supportive in a way that made my chest tight. I found myself alone in the solarium, surrounded by the shattered remnants of more than just a teacup. That evening, I sought out Aurora in the celestial library. The space was one of the estate's treasures, a circular room with a domed ceiling that showed the actual night sky above, regardless of weather or time. Thousands of books lined the walls, their spines creating a rainbow of leather and gilt that spiraled up toward the star-filled dome. Aurora had commandeered an entire section. Books spread across 3 tables in what looked like chaos, but which I recognized as her particular form of intensive research organization. She sat at the center of this scholarly storm, making notes with one hand while her other traced complex diagnostic patterns in the air.
Magical maladies,
She said without looking up as I approached.
specifically those affecting the connection between birthmarks and life force. There are more documented cases than you might expect, but none quite matching Mother's symptoms.
I settled into a chair across from her, careful not to disturb any of the open texts. What have you found?
Fragments, theories, nothing definitive.
Frustration colored her voice as she set down her quill.
The healer's notes, which Father finally gave me access to, show a systematic degradation of the magical channels that connect Mother's birthmark to her core essence. But they can't identify the cause.
Could it be natural? I asked hesitantly. People do age. Their magic weakens.
Not like this. Natural aging is gradual, predictable. This is targeted, specific, as if something is deliberately severing the connection between Mother and her magic.
Aurora interrupted. The word something hung between us, laden with implications neither of us wanted to voice. In a world of magical politics and ancient feuds, something could easily mean someone. You think she was attacked? I whispered, glancing around despite the library's privacy wards. Aurora was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently creating small lights that danced across the table's surface.
I think that we shouldn't discount any possibility, but more importantly, we need to focus on finding a cure rather than assigning blame.
She said carefully. Over the following weeks, Aurora's research consumed her completely. She converted half her laboratory into a healing research space, the other half still dedicated to her ongoing experiments with void energia. Fact she tried to hide from me, but which was obvious from the particular way certain areas were warded. I helped where I could, my skills in historical research and pattern recognition proving useful for tracking down obscure references. We worked side by side through long nights, Aurora pursuing magical solutions while I delved into historical cases, looking for precedents that might offer hope. Father supported these efforts, though I could see the toll it took on him. He provided access to texts from the family vault that hadn't seen light in generations, permitted Aurora to correspond with scholars whose theories bordered on heretical, and even allowed her to consult with healers from traditions outside the approved dragon magic orthodoxy. Mother, however, seemed resigned in a way that frightened me more than her physical deterioration. She submitted to treatments with patience, but without hope, as if she had already accepted an outcome the rest of us refused to contemplate. One evening, as I delivered a tea tray to Mother's chambers, I overheard a conversation that lodged itself in my memory like a splinter.
Aurora,
Mother was saying, her voice weaker than it had been even a week before.
you must prepare yourself for the possibility that some patterns, once broken, cannot be rewoven.
I refuse to accept that.
Aurora replied, and I could hear the crack in her voice, the desperate edge that had been growing sharper with each failed treatment.
There's always a solution if you're willing to look deeply enough, to go far enough beyond conventional boundaries.
Sometimes accepting the natural order is the greater wisdom, my son.
There's nothing natural about this.
Aurora's voice rose, and through the crack in the door, I saw her pace the room with agitated energy.
Your magic is being drained somehow. That's not how Starweavers die.
Our kind fade like stars, slowly and with dignity.
This is theft.
A long silence followed. I stood frozen in the hallway, the tea tray growing heavy in my hands, afraid to interrupt but unable to leave.
There are things about our family, about dragon magic, that you don't yet understand.
Mother finally said, and her tone carried a weight that transcended her physical weakness.
Ugh. Promise me something, Aurora. Promise that when I'm gone, you'll be careful with your research. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again.
You're not going anywhere.
Aurora insisted, but the desperate edge in her voice betrayed her growing awareness of the truth.
Promise me.
Mother repeated, implacable, despite her weakness.
I promise to be careful.
Aurora said. But I heard the evasion in it, the way she promised caution without promising to stop. I retreated down the hallway, unable to bear any more of the conversation. The tea grew cold on the tray, and I found myself in the kitchen, staring at the cooling liquid as if it held answers to questions I didn't know how to ask. The next morning brought the promised evaluations. Family healers examined Aurora thoroughly, documenting the changes to her magical signature, the alterations to her birthmark, the subtle harmonics in her voice that suggested she was partially attuned to frequencies beyond normal perception.
Minimal void contamination.
The senior healer reported to our parents, though his expression suggested he was understating the situation.
The changes appear stable for now, but they bear watching. Any further exposure could tip the balance toward more dramatic transformation.
Mother, who was undergoing her own examination, received far more troubling news. The mysterious illness that had been sapping her strength was accelerating. The healers spoke in hushed tones about magical channels deteriorating, about connections between birthmark and life force, showing unprecedented degradation.
How long?
Father asked bluntly, his face carved from stone.
Months.
The healer replied.
Perhaps a year, if we're fortunate. The condition is unlike anything in our records. We're consulting specialists from other kingdoms, but
there was no cure, no treatment, no hope, except for the slim possibility that someone, somewhere, might recognize the symptoms and offer a solution. I watched Aurora absorb this news, saw the way her expression shifted from shock to grief to something harder, determination, perhaps, or desperation.
There has to be something. Some treatment we haven't tried, some approach we haven't considered,
she said.
We're exploring every option.
The healer assured her.
But Lady Celeste's condition is unique. The degradation pattern doesn't match any known magical ailment.
Then maybe we need to look beyond known ailments,
Aurora said, and I heard the dangerous edge in her voice.
Maybe we need to consider unconventional approaches.
Aurora.
Father warned, recognizing the direction of her thoughts.
What?
Aurora turned on him, tears streaming down her face.
You'll forbid me from trying to save her too? You'll let her die rather than risk unconventional methods?
I'll let her die with dignity rather than see her transformed into something that isn't her. That's what love sometimes demands, the strength to let go rather than hold on at any cost.
That's not love.
Aurora spat.
That's cowardice dressed up as wisdom.
She stormed from the room before anyone could respond, leaving us in uncomfortable silence. Mother, despite her weakness, reached out to touch Father's hand.
She's grieving.
Mother said softly.
She'll come to acceptance in time.
But I knew better. I'd seen the look in Aurora's eyes, the same expression she'd worn when facing the dimensional window at Aethermoor. She wasn't moving toward acceptance, she was moving toward action, regardless of the cost. And I, caught between my promise to anchor her and my duty to protect our family, could only watch as the pieces moved into place for the tragedy that would ultimately tear us apart. The void research that had seemed like dangerous curiosity before Mother's diagnosis now became something else entirely, a desperate gambit to save someone who might already be beyond saving. And Aurora, brilliant and reckless and driven by love, would pursue it with the same intensity she brought to everything else. The confrontation with our parents had changed nothing and everything. The battle lines were drawn, the positions established. All that remained was to see which force would prove stronger, the family's determination to protect Aurora from herself, or Aurora's determination to transcend every limitation in pursuit of impossible salvation. Looking back, I think we all knew how it would end. But we each played our parts anyway, driven by love and fear and the terrible hope that somehow, against all precedent and wisdom, this time might be different. The void experiment at Aethermoor had been the first crack in our foundation. Mother's illness was the pressure that would widen that crack into a chasm. And Aurora's desperate need to find meaning in meaningless loss would ultimately shatter us all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First came the months of failed treatments, of Aurora's increasingly frantic research, of the slow fade of Mother's light. First came the terrible realization that love alone wasn't enough to hold us together when fundamental worldviews diverged. First came the autumn, when everything began to fall apart, one leaf at a time. What followed after the confrontation was a tense detente. Aurora submitted to the required evaluations and restrictions, but we all knew it was a temporary measure. She documented her Aethermoor experiment as requested, producing hundreds of pages of notes that made Father go pale as he read them. The scope of what she'd attempted, the risks she'd taken, the entities she'd glimpsed, all of it confirmed his worst fears about where her research was leading. But she also honored Mother's diplomatic compromise, pursuing her studies within approved parameters while Mother still lived. It was an unspoken agreement. Aurora would restrain her most dangerous impulses while there was still hope of finding a conventional cure. But we all understood that if when conventional medicine failed, all agreements would become void. I threw myself into my own research, desperate to find some middle ground between Aurora's reckless pursuit of void knowledge and Father's absolute prohibition. I studied threshold states, liminal magic, the spaces between dragon and void where hybrid energies might exist. If Aurora was determined to push boundaries, perhaps I could at least help her find safer boundaries to push. The days shortened as autumn progressed, and with each passing week, Mother grew weaker. The river of stars birthmark that had once flowed across her collarbone like liquid light now barely flickered, a dying constellation that mirrored her fading life force. She maintained her grace and dignity even as her body betrayed her, continuing to mediate family disputes and manage political relationships until she could barely rise from bed. And through it all, Aurora watched with eyes that held too much grief, determination, and a growing certainty that conventional approaches would fail. The confrontation had crystallized something in her, transforming abstract research into personal mission. She would save Mother, no matter the cost. We just didn't realize how high that cost would be until it was too late to stop her from paying it. I first noticed it in the books she was reading. Mixed among the healing texts and theoretical treatises were volumes I recognized from the restricted archives, the same texts she had been secretly studying since she was 12. Books about the nature of void energy, about the balance between creation and destruction, about powers that predated the first dragon's ordering of reality. "What are you doing?" I asked her one night, finding her in her laboratory surrounded by crystalline structures that hummed with energy that felt fundamentally wrong. She looked up from her work, and I was struck by how thin she'd become, how her eyes seemed to burn with an inner fire that was consuming her from within.
I'm exploring alternatives,
She said simply. "Void magic?" I couldn't keep the fear from my voice. "Aurora, you can't seriously be considering..."
Why not? Traditional healing has failed. Dragon magic, for all its order and beauty, can't touch whatever is killing her. But void energy...
She gestured to the crystals around her, which I now recognized as the resonance chambers she'd been developing.
Void energy operates on different principles. It might be able to restore what's been severed.
Or it might corrupt what's left, I countered, moving closer despite my instinctive fear of the apparatus surrounding her. Mother wouldn't want this. You know she wouldn't. Aurora's hands stilled on the crystal she'd been adjusting. For a moment, her careful control cracked, and I saw the raw grief beneath.
Mother is dying. Dying in a way that makes no sense, from a malady that shouldn't exist. If there's even a chance that void integration could save her.
At what cost? I asked gently, reaching out to take her hands. They were cold, far colder than they should have been, and I could feel a subtle vibration through her skin that spoke of energies barely contained. What would be the point of saving her life if the process transformed her into something she would never want to be? Aurora pulled away from my touch, turning back to her crystals.
You don't understand,
She said, and there was something hard in her voice now, something I'd never heard before.
You've always been content with limitations, with accepting what is rather than fighting for what could be. But I can't. Won't just watch her fade away when there might be a solution.
The accusation stung more than I cared to admit. Was I content with limitations? Or was I simply more aware of them, more accepting of the boundaries that kept us safe from forces we couldn't control? I understand that you're hurting, I said carefully. We all are. But this path you're considering, Aurora, it's dangerous, not just physically, but spiritually. The void doesn't give without taking.
Then I'll pay the price. My life, my soul, whatever it demands. If it saves her, it's worth it.
The absoluteness of that statement terrified me. This wasn't the sister who had always carefully weighed costs and benefits, who approached magic with scientific precision. This was someone driven by grief and desperation to consider the unthinkable. And if Mother refuses? I asked. If she won't accept healing that comes from void energy? Aurora's silence was answer enough. She was already past the point of seeking permission, focused only on finding a solution regardless of whether it would be accepted. I left her laboratory that night with a cold weight in my stomach. Aurora was brilliant, possibly the most talented star weaver of our generation. If anyone could safely work with void energy, it would be her. But I'd read the histories, knew the stories of those who had walked this path before. They all began with the best intentions, the most noble goals. They all ended in corruption or disappearance. And now my sister was following their footsteps, driven by love and loss toward a destination I couldn't see but feared with every fiber of my being. Winter arrived early that year, or perhaps it only seemed that way because of the chill that had settled over our household. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains, muffling the world beyond the estate's boundaries and creating a sense of isolation that matched our emotional state. Mother's decline accelerated as the days shortened. She could no longer walk unassisted, magical levitation being less taxing than physical movement. Her beautiful hair, once the color of starlight on water, had faded to dull silver. Most heartbreaking of all, her magic, which had always been as natural to her as breathing, came only in fitful spurts, each use leaving her more drained than before. Father moved his study to the room adjoining their bedchamber, conducting family business in hushed tones so he could remain close. I often found him sitting beside her bed in the deep hours of the night, holding her hand and speaking quietly of shared memories, of plans for a future that grew less likely with each passing day. Aurora, meanwhile, had become almost ghost-like herself. She emerged from her laboratory only when absolutely necessary, her research consuming her to the point where she frequently forgot to eat or sleep. When she did appear, the changes in her were disturbing her birthmark, pulsed constantly now, shifting between gold and deeper hues I didn't want to name. Her eyes held depths that hadn't been there before, as if she were seeing layers of reality the rest of us couldn't perceive.
She's losing herself.
Father said to me one evening as we watched Aurora interact with Mother during one of her rare visits.
The research is consuming her.
I wanted to defend my sister, to say that she was simply dedicated, that her changes were temporary effects of intensive magical work. But the words wouldn't come. We both knew something fundamental was shifting in Aurora, something that went beyond normal magical evolution. Maybe if she had more help, I suggested carefully. Other researchers who could share the burden. Father shook his head.
She's moved beyond what most would consider acceptable research. The texts she's consulting, the energies she's working with. No reputable mage would assist her now.
The word reputable hung between us, heavy with implication. Because there were disreputable mages who might help, members of branch families who had been censured for similar research, scholars who operated in the shadows of acceptable society. And I feared Aurora might already be in contact with them. Mother asked for both Aurora and me to join her in the garden pavilion. The request was formal, delivered by a servant rather than casually mentioned, which gave it weight beyond a simple family gathering. The pavilion was warm despite the frost on its glass walls, magical heating creating a bubble of summer in the midst of approaching winter. Mother reclined on a daybed piled with quilts and cushions, looking fragile but strangely luminous, as if she were already partially translated to light. Aurora arrived late, and I could smell the ozone of heavy magical work clinging to her robes. She'd made an effort to appear normal hair, neatly arranged, formal clothing, properly worn, but there was a distracted quality to her presence, as if most of her attention remained in her laboratory with whatever experiment she'd interrupted.
My sun and moon,
Mother said, smiling as we settled on either side of her daybed. Her voice was thin but steady, carrying an authority that transcended physical weakness.
I have something important to tell you both.
Aurora's posture stiffened, her fingers twitching in what I recognized as suppressed spell-casting movements.
If this is another lecture about accepting the inevitable,
It's about your birthmarks.
Mother continued, taking my hand in hers. Her fingers felt like bird bones wrapped in parchment, so fragile I was afraid to squeeze back.
About what they mean for your futures.
Even Aurora fell silent at this. Our birthmarks were more than mere physical traits. They were manifestations of our connection to dragon magic, indicators of our potential and purpose. For Mother to address them formally suggested this was no casual conversation but something closer to a deathbed bequest.
Lysandra, your star crown pattern marks you as a true heir to the main Starweaver line. It carries the responsibility of preservation, of maintaining balance when all around you may fall to extremes. This will be your burden.
I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The star crown was a stabilizing mark, one that appeared in those destined to hold the family together through difficult times. I'd known this academically, but hearing it from Mother gave it weight I wasn't prepared for. She turned to Aurora, whose hunter's crown birthmark was pulsing visibly through her robes, cycling through colors that included those dangerous violet hues I'd noticed in her magical workings.
And you, my brilliant Aurora. Your mark is rare. Only a handful of Starweavers have borne it through our history. It signifies tremendous power, but also vulnerability.
vulnerability to what?
Aurora asked, her voice uncharacteristically small. For a moment, she looked like the child she'd never really been allowed to be, seeking reassurance from a mother who could no longer provide easy comfort. Mother's gaze was steady, searching, as if she could see through Aurora's careful facades to the dangerous research beneath.
To the void, my son. Those with the hunter's crown have an affinity for sensing patterns others cannot, including patterns in the void itself. It's what makes you so extraordinary, but it's also what makes you susceptible to hearing whispers others can safely ignore.
I would never.
Aurora began, but the protest died on her lips. We all knew it was already too late for such denials.
Not intentionally. But the most dangerous paths often begin with the best intentions. The void doesn't corrupt through force, it seduces through possibility, through visions of what could be if only we were brave enough to reach beyond safe boundaries.
She took a labored breath before continuing, each word clearly costing her effort.
After I'm gone.
Don't!
Aurora interrupted.
I'm close to a breakthrough if you'd just let me try the experimental treatment I've developed.
Aurora.
Father's voice came from the pavilion entrance, firm but gentle. None of us had heard him approach, but he stood there now, snow dusting his shoulders, his face carved from granite and grief.
Your mother has made her decision.
Aurora's fists clenched at her sides, starlight crackling between her fingers in a display of poorly controlled power. The sight startled me. Aurora never lost control of her magic. That she was doing so now spoke to the depth of her emotional turmoil.
So that's it?
She demanded, her voice rising with each word.
We just watch her die when I might have a solution? When there's a chance, however small, that void integration could restore what's been damaged?
The solution you propose comes with a cost I am unwilling to pay.
Mother said quietly, but there was steel beneath the silk of her voice.
Not for myself, and certainly not for what it might do to you.
Aurora's breath caught, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes, those brilliant, constellation-filled eyes that had lately begun to show depths that shouldn't exist in human perception. It was the first time I'd seen her cry since we were children.
You don't understand what you're asking of me. To know I might save you and be forbidden to try. It's not about accepting death, Mother. It's about accepting helplessness when I have power. It goes against everything you taught me about using our gifts to protect those we love.
Mother extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Aurora returned to the daybed and took it. The contrast was stark. Mother's fingers thin and fading, Aurora's thrumming with barely contained energy.
I'm asking you to respect that some boundaries exist for profound reasons. And I'm asking you both to promise me something.
I said immediately, my own tears flowing freely now. Mother smiled at me with such tenderness it broke my heart anew. Then she turned back to Aurora.
Promise me you'll guard each other. Sun needs moon, and moon needs sun. You balance each other in ways you don't yet fully understand.
Aurora didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was thick with suppressed emotion, carefully controlled in a way that told me she was holding back far more than she was revealing.
I promise to protect Lysandra with everything I have.
Mother's gaze sharpened despite her weakness.
That wasn't what I asked, my son. Guarding each other means allowing yourselves to be guided by each other as well. Your sister's wisdom tempers your brilliance. You need that balance, especially when dealing with forces that would use your brilliance against you.
The tension in Aurora's shoulders remained, but she nodded reluctantly.
I promise to listen to Lysandra, even when I think I know better.
It was a more honest promise than the first, acknowledging Aurora's tendency to forge ahead regardless of counsel. Mother seemed satisfied with this amended vow, though I caught the worried glance she exchanged with Father.
Now, I believe we were due for our star-watching ritual. Will you sing for us, Aurora? The Star Sleep Lullaby? I've missed hearing it.
And so, as twilight deepened into night, Aurora sang. Her voice had always been beautiful, but her deepening connection to magic, both dragon and otherwise, had given it qualities that transcended normal sound. The lullaby filled the pavilion with visible light, notes becoming stars that danced through the air in patterns that told stories older than words. But I heard the changes too, the subtle variations that had crept into the familiar melody. Where once the song had been pure comfort, now it carried undertones of longing, of questions seeking answers, of boundaries being tested with each carefully modulated note. The star patterns Aurora wove seemed to stretch in directions they shouldn't, reaching toward shadows at the edges of perception. Mother closed her eyes, her breathing becoming more peaceful with each verse. But I saw the single tear that traced down her cheek, and I knew she heard the changes too. Her brilliant daughter was transforming in ways that couldn't be stopped, and she wouldn't be there to guide or guard against the dangers that transformation might bring. I watched the stars emerge overhead through the pavilion's glass ceiling, trying to commit every detail of this moment to memory, the sound of Aurora's changed but still beautiful voice. The sight of Mother's face peaceful, despite her illness, the warmth of Father's hand as he reached over to squeeze my shoulder. I didn't know it would be our last night together as a complete family. Some part of me suspected, perhaps, but I pushed the knowledge away, clinging to the moment with desperate intensity. By morning, Mother was gone. She slipped away in her sleep as quietly as she had lived, with dignity and grace that belied the power she had wielded in life. Father found her when he woke, her hand still clasped in his, her face wearing an expression of such perfect peace that for a moment he thought she was merely sleeping deeply. His cry of grief brought the household running. I arrived to find him cradling her against his chest, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs that seemed to tear from the very depths of his soul. Aurora stood frozen in the doorway, her face white as parchment, her eyes wide with a denial that wouldn't be reasoned with.
No,
She said, the word flat, an absolute.
No, she can't be. I was so close to a solution. Just another day, maybe 2.
She moved toward the bed as if in a trance, her hands already glowing with diagnostic magic.
Aurora!
Father said, his voice rough with tears.
She's gone. Let her rest.
But Aurora wasn't listening. She cast spell after spell, each more complex than the last, trying to find some spark of life that might be rekindled, some connection that might be restored. The magic she used grew increasingly desperate, pulling from reserves that made the air itself groan with strain. "Aurora, stop," I said, moving to intercept her. "Please, you're going to hurt yourself." She turned on me then, and I saw madness flickering in her eye snot. True insanity, but the desperate irrationality of grief refusing acceptance.
I can fix this. The void energy I've been working with, it operates outside normal constraints of life and death. If I can just...
No.
Father's voice cut through her building frenzy like a blade. He laid Mother's body gently back on the bed and rose to face Aurora, his own grief temporarily set aside in the face of this new threat.
You will not defile your mother's rest with void magic. I forbid it.
The word forbid hung in the air between them, heavy with parental authority and family law. Aurora stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, as if she were trying to form arguments that wouldn't come. Then, without warning, she crumpled. I caught her as she fell, my sister's weight bearing us both to the floor. She sobbed against my shoulder, great wrenching sounds that seemed to tear from her very soul. The controlled, brilliant Aurora, who always had an answer, always had a plan, was gone. In her place was a grieving daughter who had just lost the one person who truly understood her.
I failed her. All my research, all my power, and I couldn't save her. What's the point of being exceptional if you can't protect the people you love?
I held her tighter, my own tears mingling with hers.
You didn't fail anyone. Mother chose her path. She faced her death with courage and grace. Honoring that choice isn't failure. It's love.
But I knew my words were hollow comfort. For someone like Aurora, who had been solving impossible problems since childhood, the existence of a problem she couldn't solve was almost incomprehensible. Mother's death wasn't just a loss. It was a fundamental challenge to Aurora's understanding of her place in the world. The Starweaver estate mourned in traditional silence. According to custom, we dimmed every magical light for 7 days, leaving only natural illumination to guide us. The darkness served both practical and symbolic purposes. It showed respect for the departed while reminding us that even in the absence of magical light, the sun and moon and stars continued their eternal dance. Important family members and political allies arrived over the following days, their carriages appearing like shadows through the winter snow. They came to pay respects, to offer condolences, to ensure that the complex web of alliances Mother had maintained would survive her passing. I moved through the funeral rites in a fog, performing each ritual as instructed while feeling oddly detached from my own body. Father maintained the stoic dignity expected of the family head, but I saw the toll it took. New lines etched themselves around his mouth overnight. His shoulders, always so straight and strong, developed a curve that spoke of burdens too heavy to bear. When he thought no one was watching, he would touch objects. Mother had loved her favorite teacup, the shawl she wore on cool evenings, the journal where she recorded her garden observations as if trying to capture some essence of her that might linger in material things. Aurora was nowhere to be found.
Your sister needs space to grieve in her own way.
Father told me when I expressed concern about her absence from the formal ceremonies. But I could see the worry behind his reassurance, the fear that Aurora's way of grieving might lead her down paths better left untraveled. On the 3rd night of mourning, unable to sleep and unwilling to face another hour of well-meaning condolences, I sought Aurora in her laboratory. The door was locked unusual in itself, as she typically maintained an open-door policy for family. More concerning was the total absence of light from beneath the door, suggesting she wasn't merely working but had sealed the space entirely. I pressed my ear to the wood, straining to hear any sound that might indicate what she was doing inside. Nothing. The silence was so complete it felt unnatural, as if the room had been removed from normal reality entirely. Following an instinct I couldn't fully explain, I made my way through the estate's winding corridors to the one place I knew Aurora might go if her laboratory proved insufficient for her purposes, the void pool in the gardens. The pool sat in a secluded grove, surrounded by white birch trees whose pale bark seemed to glow in the moonlight. It was a small, perfectly circular pool of water so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. This was one of the estate's most dangerous features, a contained breach point where void energy could be safely observed but never touched. Children were forbidden from approaching it, and even adults visited only for specific ritual purposes. Aurora sat cross-legged at its edge, so still she might have been a statue carved from starlight and shadow. Her formal mourning robes pooled around her, and her unbound hair, which she hadn't cut or styled since Mother's death, created a silver veil that partially obscured her face. "Aurora," I said softly, using the most intimate version of her nickname. "Everyone's worried about you." She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my presence in any way I could see. But when she spoke, her voice carried across the space between us with unnatural clarity.
Did you know Mother came here every day at dawn? I followed her once when I was 12. She would sit exactly where I'm sitting now, gazing into the void as if it held answers to questions she couldn't voice. When she caught me, I expected anger. Instead, she said something I've never forgotten.
I moved closer, drawn by the story despite my fear of the pool's influence. What did she say?
She said, "We guard against the void not because it's evil, but because it's hungry. It offers everything and demands everything in return. The trick is knowing when the price is worth paying."
Aurora finally turned to look at me, and I gasped at what I saw. The silver flecks in her eyes had expanded dramatically, swirling in patterns that hurt to follow. More disturbing were the traces of violet light that flickered at the edges of her irises, like aurora borealis contained within human eyes. She had been experimenting again, but with a recklessness that spoke of grief transmuted into dangerous purpose.
"Mother is in my dreams now. She's trying to tell me something, but I can't quite hear her. The words get lost between sleeping and waking, between the real and the void."
Dream visitations weren't uncommon in our family after a death, but they were usually clear messages of comfort or guidance. Fragmented whispers suggested something else entirely, either Aurora's mind creating what it desperately wanted to perceive, or worse, something using Mother's image to communicate from beyond normal death. "What does she say?" I asked, throat tight with sudden emotion. Aurora's gaze returned to the pool, where impossible constellations swirled in the black water.
She says, "Remember the balance," and something about doors, about some doors being meant to close and others meant to open. But I can't tell which is which.
I reached for her hand, alarmed by how cold her skin felt. It was like touching winter itself, all warmth leached away by proximity to forces that existed outside normal thermodynamics. "You haven't been sleeping." She pulled away from my touch.
"I'm close to understanding something important, something Mother knew but kept from us, something about why she really died."
Ice formed in my stomach. "What are you saying?"
"I'm saying that Mother's illness wasn't natural. The symptoms, the progression, the specific way her connection to dragon magic was severed at all points to deliberate action. Someone or something wanted her silenced."
I pulled back sharply, alarm flooding through me. "Aurora, you can't seriously believe."
"I can and I do. I've found references in the restricted archives cases of Starweavers whose birthmarks faded before their deaths. Always those with particular patterns. Always those who had been researching certain subjects."
"Stop!" I stood abruptly, putting distance between us. "Just stop. Mother died of an illness, a tragic, terrible illness that the best healers couldn't cure. Creating conspiracy theories won't bring her back."
"This isn't about bringing her back. It's about understanding why she died.
Aurora said, rising to face me.
She died because sometimes people die.
The words came out harsher than I intended, driven by grief and frustration.
Not everything is a mystery to be solved, Aurora. Not every tragedy has a hidden meaning. Sometimes the universe is just cruel.
Aurora's fingers traced patterns in the air, leaving brief after images of light that formed symbols I didn't recognize.
Mother's River of Stars pattern connected her to ancient wisdom. She had access to racial memories, to knowledge passed down through bloodlines rather than books. If she discovered something that challenged the established order.
Listen to yourself. You suggesting someone murdered our mother because of theoretical magical research? Do you have any actual evidence? Or is this just your grief looking for someone to blame?
I said, my voice shaking the established order. The question hung between us like a blade. Aurora's expression flickered hurt, anger, and something else I couldn't identify.
I'm suggesting that Mother's death fits a pattern, and I'm suggesting that her final message to me about being careful with my research, about some doors not closing once opened, was a warning.
Or maybe...
I countered, tears stinging my eyes.
She was just a dying woman, worried about her daughter's dangerous obsessions. Maybe she saw you heading down this exact path, void research, forbidden knowledge, paranoid theories, and wanted to warn you before it was too late.
You don't understand. You've never understood.
She said coldly.
You're too content with simple explanations, too willing to accept what you're told.
And you're too eager to see conspiracies where there's only tragedy, I shot back. This isn't one of your research problems, Aurora. This is our mother's death. Give her the dignity of accepting it instead of turning it into another mystery for you to solve.
I'm already in danger. The Hunter's Crown marks me as someone who will inevitably ask the same questions Mother did. The only choice is whether I ask them prepared or unprepared.
What are you planning? Aurora turned from the pool, and in the moonlight, I could see the determination that had hardened her features into something almost inhuman in its intensity.
I'm going to finish what Mother started. I'm going to find the answers she was seeking. And if someone did silence her...
She trailed off, but the unspoken conclusion hung in the air like a blade. Aurora, please. This path you're considering, it's exactly what Mother warned against. You're letting grief drive you toward the very dangers she wanted you to avoid.
Or I'm honoring her true legacy by refusing to let her discoveries die with her. She wouldn't want us to accept comfortable lies if uncomfortable truths were available.
Aurora countered. She moved past me, heading back toward the house with steps that seemed to carry her just slightly above the ground rather than on it. I followed, my heart heavy with the certainty that something fundamental had shifted in my sister's worldview. The Aurora who had sobbed in my arms 3 days ago had transformed her grief into purpose, but it was a purpose that terrified me. The next few months passed in a blur of adjustment and quiet observation. Father threw himself into family affairs with an intensity that left little room for personal mourning. The delicate political balance Mother had maintained required constant attention, and he met with representatives from allied houses daily, working to ensure that her death didn't create exploitable weaknesses in our position. I focused on my studies, finding comfort in the familiar routines of magical theory and historical research. But I also watched Aurora, noting the changes that became more pronounced with each passing week. She maintained the appearance of normal activities, attending family dinners, participating in the necessary rituals, responding appropriately to social obligations. But there was a distance to her interactions, as if she were performing a role she had memorized rather than living her actual life. Her true existence happened in the hours between, in the laboratory sessions that stretched through entire nights, in the correspondence she received from sources she didn't discuss. The physical changes were subtle but unmistakable to someone who knew her well. Her hair, always striking in its silver-white coloration, had developed an inner luminescence that made it seem to glow in low light. Her movements had become almost too fluid, as if she were partially disconnected from normal physics. Most disturbing were her eyes, the violet depths now permanently flecked with moving silver, occasionally showing flashes of that dangerous violet light I'd first noticed at the void pool. "What are you becoming?" I asked her one evening as autumn gave way to early winter. We were sharing tea in her study, a ritual we'd maintained despite the growing gulf between us. She looked up from the journal she'd been reading, one of Mother's. I realized with a start.
I'm becoming what I was meant to be. What the hunter's crown has always indicated, someone who can perceive beyond traditional limitations.
At what cost? Aurora set down the journal, giving me her full attention for the first time in weeks.
Everything has a cost, little moon. The question is whether we're paying for something worthwhile or simply paying to maintain comfortable illusions.
And Mother's death? Have you found the answers you were looking for? A shadow crossed her face.
I found questions that lead to more questions. But yes, I've discovered some things.
She rose and went to a locked cabinet I hadn't noticed before, removing several documents.
Mother was researching the same things I am now. The nature of the void, the purpose of the seals, the possibility that dragon and void magic were never meant to be permanently separated.
She spread the documents on the desk between used pages covered in Mother's elegant handwriting, diagrams that showed magical theory I couldn't begin to understand, correspondence with scholars whose names I didn't recognize, but whose subjects were clear from the context. I examined them carefully, my scholarly training taking over, despite my emotional resistance. Yes, these were Mother's notes. Yes, she had been researching void theory. But
look at the dates. See how her research intensifies in the months before her illness? See how she mentions being watched and dangerous interest in her later notes?
Aurora insisted, pointing to specific entries. I did see it, but I also saw a dozen other possible explanations. She was paranoid because she was researching dangerous subjects. That's sensible caution, not evidence of conspiracy.
And this?
Aurora pulled out a final documenta letter in Mother's hand, apparently never sent. It spoke of discoveries that could change everything and concerns about those who benefit from current misconceptions. An unsent letter full of vague concerns, I said, pushing the documents away. Aurora, I understand you want her death to mean something, to be part of some larger pattern you can solve. But sometimes people just die. Even magical people. Even our mother. Aurora's expression hardened.
You're being willfully blind.
And you're being willfully paranoid, I countered. This obsession with finding meaning in her death. It's not healthy. It's not what she would want.
How do you know what she would want?
Aurora snapped.
You were always Father's daughter. Focused on your histories and philosophies, I was the one who worked with her on magical research. I was the one who understood her drive to push boundaries.
The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. Mother and Aurora had shared a connection through their research that I'd never been part of. But that didn't mean I didn't know my mother. I know she wouldn't want you destroying yourself chasing shadows, I said quietly. Whether her death was natural or otherwise, she's gone. And you're using these theories to justify increasingly dangerous research.
I'm honoring her legacy.
You're using her death as an excuse to dive deeper into void research. Don't pretend this is noble, Aurora. You were already on this path. Mother's death just removed the last person who could have stopped you.
The words hung between us like a physical blow. Aurora's face went white, then flushed with anger.
Get out,
she said, her voice deadly quiet. Aurora!
Get out!
I left, my heart heavy with the knowledge that I'd spoken a truth neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Aurora's grief was real, but so was her obsession with void research. Whether Mother had been murdered or noted, I still believed not Aurora was using the possibility to justify choices she'd already been making. I was my sister's last connection to something real, not involving the void corruption she was falling into. Perhaps if I considered her evidence, I could pull her out of the void. Look, Aurora, I'm willing to look at evidence, I clarified, to understand what drove Mother's research and what's driving yours. That doesn't mean I'll agree with your conclusions, but I can't make informed judgments from ignorance. Relief, and something like hope flashed across Aurora's face.
You mean that? You're willing to look beyond what we've been taught?
I nodded, and then Aurora smiled then, and it was the first genuine expression of happiness I'd seen from her since Mother's death.
That's all I ask, little moon. An open mind and honest evaluation.
She began pulling more materials from hidden compartments and warded drawers books that made my skin crawl just looking at their bindings, crystals that hummed with energies that felt fundamentally wrong, diagrams that depicted reality in ways that challenged basic assumptions about how magic worked.
The fundamental question
Aurora explained, as she arranged these materials,
is whether the first dragon's sealing of the void was a protective measure or a cosmological amputation. Did they save reality from destruction, or did they sever it from half of its natural state?
The histories are clear, I began, but Aurora raised a hand.
The histories are written by those who benefited from the sealing, but there are other records, older texts, fragments that survived the Great Codification. They tell a different story.
She showed me passages written in languages that predated modern script, translated through painstaking work. They spoke of a time when dragon and void magic flowed together, creating possibilities that neither could achieve alone. Of void dragons not as destroyers but as entities of pure potential, of change and growth and evolution. Of a conflict that was less about good versus evil and more about competing visions of what reality should be static and safe, or fluid and full of possibility. Even if this alternative history is true, I said, struggling to process the implications, the seals have protected us for millennia. Whatever the original intent, they work.
Do they?
Aurora challenged. She pulled out a map of the kingdom, marked with points of light and darkness.
These are the documented void breaches from the last century. Notice a pattern?
I studied the map, my pattern recognition skills engaging automatically. They're increasing, and moving inward from the borders.
The seals are weakening.
Aurora confirmed.
Not failing catastrophically, but degrading, like a dam developing cracks. The question is whether we shore up the dam indefinitely or find a way to channel the water safely.
Or, I said, studying the data more carefully, these could be natural fluctuations. Void breaches have always occurred, that's why we have containment protocols. A slight increase over a century doesn't necessarily indicate systematic failure. Aurora's expression tightened.
You're being willfully blind to the pattern.
And you're seeing catastrophe, where there might be normal variation, I countered. Aurora, this is exactly what I mean. You're so convinced that everything is connected: Mother's death, the seals weakening, your research being necessary, that you're forcing data to fit your narrative.
The data speaks for itself.
Data can be interpreted many ways, I interrupted. That's why we need multiple researchers, peer review, skeptical analysis. Not one grieving daughter convinced she's uncovered a grand conspiracy. Aurora turned away from the map, her shoulders rigid with frustration.
What will it take? What will it take for you to see what's right in front of you?
Evidence, I said simply. Real, concrete, undeniable evidence. Not patterns that might be coincidence. Not theories that conveniently justify dangerous research. Evidence.
And if I find it?
Then I'll believe you, I promised. But Aurora, you have to be prepared for the possibility that there's no grand conspiracy. That Mother simply died, that the seals are functioning normally, that your research is dangerous rather than necessary.
I won't find that, because that's not the truth,
she said with absolute certainty. Her conviction frightened me more than any of her physical transformations. This unshakable belief in her own theories, this inability to consider alternatives, was this Aurora's natural personality intensified, or was it the void's influence on her thinking? Either way, I knew I had to stay close. If I couldn't convince her to see reason, at least I could try to keep her grounded, to question her assumptions, to be the skeptical voice she clearly needed. Even if she no longer wanted to hear it. And void integration is your proposed channel?
Controlled void integration,
she corrected.
Not the chaotic corruption our family fears, but conscious, deliberate integration of void principles into dragon magic, creating synthesis rather than opposition.
She showed me her research notes, careful documentation of experiments that made my blood run cold. controlled exposure to void energy, measurements of psychological and physiological changes, theoretical frameworks for containing and directing void influence without being consumed by it. You've been experimenting on yourself, I said, not quite able to keep the accusation from my voice.
I've been the primary test subject, yes. Who else could I ask to take such risks? And the results have been illuminating.
Aurora acknowledged without shame. The changes to your appearance.
External manifestations of internal evolution. My perception has expanded. I can see patterns that were invisible before, understand connections that seemed impossible. The void isn't chaos, it's pure possibility waiting to be shaped by conscious will.
The fervor in her voice frightened me more than her physical changes. This was the passion of a true believer, someone who had found their life's purpose. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely unstoppable. What happens next? I asked. Where does this research lead? Aurora was quiet for a moment, considering her answer.
That depends partly on what I discover, and partly on who else is watching. If Mother's killers realize I'm following her path...
If they exist, I interjected. Aurora, you're basing major life decisions on a theory that might be nothing more than grief-driven paranoia. Her expression flashed with anger before settling into something more like pity.
You still don't see it. Even with all the evidence, you refuse to see it.
I see my sister transforming herself based on unproven assumptions, I countered. I see void energy affecting your judgment, making you see conspiracies where there might be none.
Or making me see clearly for the first time,
she said.
But I suppose we'll find out, won't we? When I discover the truth, you'll have to acknowledge it.
And if there's no truth to discover? If Mother simply died of an illness? I challenged. Will you acknowledge that? Or will you keep searching until you find, or create evidence that supports what you already believe? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached across the desk to take my hands.
I know this is frightening. I know it challenges everything we've been taught, but I can't do this alone. I need my anchor, my moon, my voice of reason when the whispers become too seductive.
I looked at our joined handshakes glowing faintly with energies that shouldn't exist in our reality, mine ordinary and warm and human. The contrast was stark, but the connection remained. Whatever Aurora was becoming, she was still my sister. I'll help you, I said, meaning it despite my fears. But we establish rules, safeguards, ways to measure if the research is changing you beyond acceptable parameters. And Aurora, if we find no real evidence of murder, you have to be willing to let it go.
Of course.
Aurora agreed, though something in her eyes suggested she had no doubt about what we would find.
Scientific methodology requires controls and outside observation. You'll be my control, my constant. If I begin to lose myself...
I'll bring you back, I promised, no matter what it takes. Even if that meant pulling her back from delusions she desperately wanted to believe. We spent the rest of that night establishing protocols, warning signs to watch for, boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, emergency procedures if void influence became too strong. It felt like preparing for war, which in a way I suppose we were. War against ignorance, against those who would suppress truth, against the very structures that held reality in its current configuration. As dawn approached and exhaustion finally drove us to seek our beds, Aurora hugged me tightly.
Thank you,
she whispered.
For believing in me, for being willing to see beyond fear to possibility.
I returned the embrace, feeling the strange energies that flowed through her, accepting them as part of who she was becoming. Always, I said. Sun and moon, remember? Whatever comes, we face it together. But as I made my way to my own chambers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just agreed to something far more dangerous than either of us fully understood. The path we were embarking on led into darkness, not the comprehensible darkness of night that gave way to dawn, but the absolute darkness between realities where even stars feared to shine. And somewhere in that darkness, whatever had killed Mother waited, watched, and prepared to strike again. Winter deepened, bringing with it a cold that seemed to penetrate even the estate's magical warming systems. Or perhaps the chill I felt came from within, from the growing certainty that Aurora's research was approaching a critical threshold. She had been working with increasing intensity, often disappearing into her laboratory for days at a time. When she emerged, the changes were more pronounced. Her eyes now held depths that seemed to extend beyond the physical space they occupied. Her movements had taken on a quality that suggested she was navigating more dimensions than the rest of us could perceive. And her birthmark, her hunter's crown birthmark, had become something unprecedented. Where once it had been a golden pattern that pulsed with her heartbeat, it now seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Gold, yes, but also silver and violet, and colors that had no names, because human eyes weren't meant to see them. It had spread, too, sending tendrils of transformed skin down her shoulder blade in patterns that resembled constellation maps of skies that didn't exist in our reality. "It's accelerating," I told her one evening, unable to keep the worry from my voice. We were in her laboratory, where I had been documenting her latest experimental results. The data was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying.
Evolution often appears as acceleration when approaching a threshold,
Aurora replied. Her attention focused on adjusting one of her resonance chambers. The crystalline structure hummed with harmonics that made my teeth ache and my birthmark tingle with sympathetic vibration. "Evolution or corruption?" I challenged. "How can we tell the difference anymore?" She paused in her work, turning to face me fully. In the laboratory's mixed lighting, part traditional magical illumination, part the strange radiance emanating from her void-touched crystals, she looked like a being caught between worlds. Which, I supposed, she was.
"The difference,"
she said carefully,
"lies in consciousness and control. Corruption is mindless, chaotic, destructive to the sense of self. What I'm experiencing is expansion of self, not dissolution. I remain Aurora, but Aurora with broader perception, deeper understanding."
"You referred to yourself as we yesterday," I pointed out. During the family dinner, Father noticed. A flicker of concern crossed her features.
"Did I? I wasn't aware."
She considered this, her expression becoming distant in the way that meant she was examining her own mental processes.
"Interesting. The boundaries of individual consciousness become more fluid when one can perceive the interconnectedness of all things. But the core remains singular, remains me."
"For now," I said quietly.
"For now."
She agreed, surprising me with the acknowledgement.
"Which is why we must move quickly. The window of opportunity is narrowing."
"Opportunity? For what?" Aurora moved to her desk, pulling out a letter I recognized. The last correspondence from Lady Ravenna of the Night Rose branch, delivered through channels that bypassed Father's scrutiny. The very existence of this ongoing communication was a betrayal of family trust, but we had moved beyond such simple considerations.
"There's going to be a gathering,"
Aurora explained.
"Not of the full council, but of those who share certain perspectives on the nature of void energy and its relationship to dragon magic. Lady Ravenna has invited me to attend, to share my research with others who might appreciate its implications."
My blood chilled. The Nitros are organizing void sympathizers. Aurora, this is exactly what the family has always warned against.
"The family warns against many things without understanding them,"
Aurora interrupted.
"Yes, some who attend will be void-touched in the way our traditions fear. But others are simply researchers like myself, seekers of truth who refuse to accept incomplete answers."
"And you want to go?" It wasn't a question.
"I need to go,"
she corrected.
"My research has reached the limits of what I can achieve in isolation. I need access to resources, to knowledge, to perspectives that our family library doesn't provide, and—"
She hesitated, then continued with visible reluctance.
"I need to know who else was involved in Mother's death. The Night Rose have ways of discovering such things."
That gave me pause. The prospect of identifying Mother's killers had haunted both of us, but I hadn't considered that Aurora might find answers outside our family's official channels. "When?" I asked.
3 nights hence, the winter solstice, when the boundaries between states are thinnest."
She watched me carefully, gauging my reaction.
"I want you to come with me."
The request shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. To a gathering of void researchers and Night Rose sympathizers? Aurora, I'm the heir to the main Starweaver line. My presence there would be
protective. Your presence would force a certain level of civility, prevent any aggressive recruitment tactics. And I need my anchor, Lysa, especially in a place where void energies will be concentrated.
If I agree, I said slowly. We go together, we stay together, and we leave the moment I sense genuine danger. No arguments, no delays.
Agreed.
Aurora said immediately.
And Little Moon, thank you. I know what this costs you.
Did she? Could someone whose perception had expanded beyond human norms truly understand the weight of betraying family traditions that had shaped my entire identity? But looking at her, my brilliant, transformed, dangerous sister, I knew I would pay that cost and more to keep her safe. The night of the winter solstice arrived with unnatural clarity. No clouds obscured the stars, no wind disturbed the snow-covered landscape. It was as if the world itself held its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. Aurora and I slipped away from the estate using paths she had warded against detection. Another betrayal, another line crossed. We traveled by unconventional means, Aurora's expanded abilities allowing her to fold space in ways that turned a journey of hours into one of minutes. The sensation was deeply unsettling, like being turned inside out and reassembled in a different configuration. The gathering was held in an abandoned observatory on the borders between territories, a place that belonged to no family and thus served as neutral ground for those who operated outside traditional structures. As we approached, I could feel the concentration of magical energy, not just dragon magic, but something else, something that made my skin crawl and my birthmark burn with warning.
Stay close,
Aurora murmured, though she seemed energized rather than concerned by the alien energies surrounding us. The observatory's main dome had been converted into a meeting space. Perhaps 30 individuals had gathered, their appearances ranging from completely normal to distinctly otherworldly. I recognized some faces from legitimate magical society researchers who had disappeared from public view, scholars whose theories had been deemed too radical, nobles who had asked too many questions. And at the center of it all, Lady Ravenna Nightrose held court. She was more striking in person than she had appeared at the council meeting years ago. The black star birthmark at her throat seemed to pulse with its own dark light, and her eyes held depths that rivaled Aurora's own. When she saw us enter, her smile was both welcoming and predatory.
Lady Aurora,
she said, her voice carrying despite the distance between us.
How wonderful that you could join us. And you've brought your sister, the heir herself. What an unexpected pleasure.
I felt the weight of dozens of gazes turning toward us, evaluating, calculating. Some seemed merely curious, but others looked at Aurora with a hunger that made me want to step between them and my sister.
Lady Ravenna,
Aurora replied with a formal nod.
Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to sharing perspectives with fellow researchers.
Oh, you'll find we're much more than researchers here,
Ravenna said, gesturing for us to approach.
We're pioneers, visionaries, those who refuse to accept the limitations imposed by fear and tradition. But come, let me introduce you to some of our more notable members.
What followed was a surreal parade of individuals who existed at various points along the spectrum between traditional dragon magic and complete void integration. Some, like the scholar Matthias Crow, seemed largely unchanged, except for eyes that occasionally reflected impossible colors. Others had undergone transformations that made Aurora's changes seem subtle by comparison. One woman appeared to phase in and out of visibility as she moved, existing only partially in our reality. A man spoke in harmonics that created small rifts in the air, windows into somewhere else that sealed themselves moments after forming. And throughout it all, Lady Ravenna watched Aurora with an intensity that set every protective instinct I had on high alert.
Your research into controlled integration is remarkable,
Ravenna said once the introductions were complete.
We've all read your theoretical papers, of course, but to see the practical results?
She gestured at Aurora's transformed state with apparent admiration.
You've achieved a level of stable integration that many thought impossible.
The key is maintaining conscious direction of the process,
Aurora replied. slipping into the academic discussion with visible relief.
Precisely.
Another researcher, whose name I had already forgotten in my overwhelm, leaned forward eagerly.
The traditional view of corruption assumes a passive recipient. But what if the recipient is an active participant in their own transformation?
The discussion that followed was beyond my ability to fully comprehend. Theories about consciousness and reality, mathematical proofs that use symbols I didn't recognize, references to texts that supposedly didn't exist. But I understood enough to be terrified by the implications. These people weren't mad, weren't the chaotic void cultists our family stories had led me to expect. They were brilliant, methodical, and absolutely convinced that they were pioneering the future of magical evolution. And Aurora fit among them like a missing piece finding its place. As the formal discussions gave way to smaller group conversations, Lady Ravenna approached us directly.
I was sorry to hear about your mother,
she said, and something in her tone suggested genuine sympathy.
Lady Celeste was a remarkable woman. Her loss diminishes us all.
Aurora's expression hardened slightly.
Her loss was not natural.
I tensed beside her, wanting to intervene. Not this again. Not here, where Aurora's conspiracy theories could be used against her.
No.
Ravenna agreed simply.
It wasn't. And you want to know who was responsible.
The directness of the statement caught me off guard. Of course Ravenna would encourage Aurora's delusions. It gave her leverage, made Aurora more vulnerable to manipulation.
You have ways of discovering such things?
Aurora asked, leaning forward slightly.
I have access to certain resources. But such knowledge comes with a price. Are you prepared to pay it?
Ravenna confirmed, with a man coming beside her with their fingers intertwining. The gesture drew my attention to the matching wedding bands they wore, etched with the same void-touched patterns that marked their birthmarks.
Allow me to introduce my husband, Lord Thaddeus Nightrose.
Lord Thaddeus Nightrose moved with the fluid grace of someone who existed partially between states. Where his wife was all sharp elegance and calculated charm, he carried himself with a more contemplative bearing, as if constantly observing layers of reality the rest of us couldn't perceive. His own black star birthmark pulsed across his temple, the corrupted constellation seeming to shift and writhe in response to the void energies Aurora radiated. His hair, steel gray, despite his apparent middle years, was worn longer than current fashion dictated, tied back with a simple band that I realized with a chill was woven from some kind of void-touched material. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a small pocket of darkness that followed the movement of his head. But it was his hands that disturbed me most. Long-fingered and elegant, they moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades working with delicate magical apparatus. Yet they possessed a translucency that spoke of incomplete presence in our reality. When he gestured, I could sometimes see through them to what lay beyond, catching glimpses of impossible geometries and swirling energies that made my star-crowned birthmark pulse in warning. Those hands had clearly crafted things that should not exist, had reached into spaces where human flesh was never meant to venture.
My wife speaks truly,
Thaddeus said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he spoke from multiple dimensional positions simultaneously.
though perhaps she understates the value of what we offer. The resources of House Nightrose extend beyond mere knowledge. We possess practical methodologies, stabilization techniques developed over generations of integration.
That depends on the price,
Aurora said carefully, her gaze shifting between the newlywed couple. I wanted to shake her. Couldn't she see what was happening? The Nightrose pair was performing a carefully orchestrated manipulation Ravenna, offering to confirm Aurora's desperate theories while her husband provided the technical authority to make it seem legitimate. It was a dance they'd clearly perfected, the recently married couple moving in perfect synchronization to ensnare the vulnerable. Ravenna smiled, and there was something almost maternal in her expression that made my skin crawl. Behind her, Thaddeus nodded approvingly, his own expression carrying a paternal wisdom that was equally disturbing.
Merely that you continue your research openly, without the constraints your family would impose.
Ravenna said smoothly.
that you share your discoveries with those who can appreciate and build upon them, that you stop hiding your light under the bushel of Starweaver orthodoxy.
Show them what's possible when fear no longer limits exploration.
Thaddeus added, producing a small vial from his robes. The liquid within swirled with impossible colors, seeming to exist in multiple states simultaneously.
This, for instance, a stabilization serum my wife and I developed together during our courtship. It allows for deeper void integration while maintaining conscious control. A wedding gift, you might say, from our research to yours.
You want me to join the Night Rose?
Aurora stated, her eyes fixed on the vial with unmistakable hunger.
We want you to be free.
Ravenna corrected, while her husband held the vial up to catch the observatory's ethereal light.
Free to pursue your research without fear of purification. Rituals. Free to explore the full implications of void integration without someone deciding you've gone too far. Free to become what you're meant to be.
Free to join a new family.
Thaddeus said more directly.
One that celebrates transformation rather than fearing it. Ravenna and I have built something beautiful together. A union of minds and methodologies that pushes the boundaries of what's possible. You could be part of that legacy, Aurora.
The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. I could see Aurora considering it, weighing the benefits against the costs. Access to resources, to knowledge, to a community that understood her transformation. A couple who had clearly achieved stable integration while maintaining their partnership. Freedom from the constant fear of family intervention. And all she had to do was accept their version of mother's death, let her grief be weaponized against her own family.
And in exchange?
Aurora asked. Ravenna and Thaddeus exchanged a glance, the kind of wordless communication that comes from deep intimacy and shared purpose. It was Thaddeus who answered.
In exchange, you share your discoveries. You help us understand how you've achieved such stable integration without our traditional methods. You work with us toward a future where the artificial boundaries between dragon and void magic no longer constrain human potential.
You become part of our research collective.
Ravenna added, her hand finding her husband's again.
Not as a subordinate, but as an equal. A brilliant mind adding to our understanding.
It sounded reasonable. It sounded like everything Aurora had been seeking. Which is precisely why every instinct I had screamed danger. We need time to consider, I interjected, drawing the attention of all three. This is not a decision to be made lightly. Ravenna's gaze turned to me, and I felt the weight of her regard like a physical pressure. Beside her, Thaddeus studied me with equal intensity, though his examination felt more analytical than predatory.
Yes. The dutiful sister. The anchor.
Ravenna murmured, amusement coloring her tone.
Tell me, Lady Lysandra, what do you think of your sister's transformation? Do you see corruption or evolution?
She sees fear,
Thaddeus said before I could respond, his tone not unkind, but matter-of-fact.
The same fear that has paralyzed the Starweaver line for generations. But fear, Lady Lysandra, is simply ignorance given emotional weight. Knowledge dispels it, like light banishing shadow.
The question was a trap, but I answered honestly. I see my sister becoming something unprecedented. Whether that's ultimately positive or negative remains to be determined.
Such diplomatic caution. Your mother would be proud. She too excelled at saying much while revealing little.
You knew our mother?
Aurora asked sharply, her attention immediately riveted. The Night Rose couple shared another of those meaningful glances. This time it was Ravenna who spoke.
Lady Celeste visited us several times in her final months. Discreetly, of course. She had questions about certain theoretical frameworks, Questions that suggested she'd discovered something troubling in her own research.
Questions about the original sealing,
Thaddeus added, his expression grave.
about discrepancies between the official histories and certain astronomical records. She was particularly interested in our archives regarding the Sundering War's final days.
I felt Aurora tense beside me, her hunger for this information almost palpable. The Night Rose pair had played their card perfectly, dangling not just resources and freedom, but answers about Mother that we couldn't get anywhere else.
And what do you think of her theories about your mother's death?
Ravenna pressed, her dark eyes glittering.
Do you believe Lady Celeste was murdered for her research?
Before I could speak, Thaddeus raised a hand in a gesture that somehow commanded attention without being aggressive.
Perhaps that's a discussion better saved for those who choose to join our collective. The truth about Lady Celeste's fate is complex and painful, not something to be shared lightly or without proper context.
I felt Aurora tense beside me, but I answered truthfully. I believe my sister is grieving and looking for meaning in a meaningless loss. I believe those who prey on such grief for their own purposes are the worst kind of opportunists. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ravenna's smile sharpened, while her husband's expression grew thoughtful rather than offended.
How protective. But protection based on denial serves no one. Your mother was murdered, child. That's not theory or manipulation. It's fact. The only question is whether you're both strong enough to handle the truth about who was responsible.
The seals have protected us for millennia, I countered, trying to regain control of the conversation.
The seals have constrained us for millennia.
Thaddeus replied calmly.
There's a difference between protection and imprisonment, Lady Lysandra. Your mother began to understand this distinction. It's why she came to us. It's why she...
Before the philosophical debate could continue, a commotion near the observatory's entrance drew everyone's attention. Multiple magical signatures approaching rapidly, their combined power causing the very air to vibrate with tension. Thaddeus was the first to react, his form partially phase-shifting as he assessed the threat.
Ravenna, 7 signatures. Starweaver guards in formal configuration.
His wife's expression hardened, though she maintained her composed exterior.
It seems our privacy wards weren't quite as effective as we thought. Or perhaps Master Chen has been more resourceful than anyone credited.
When Master Chen emerged through the doorway with 6 family guards flanking him, their ceremonial armor gleaming with protective enchantments, I felt my blood turn to ice. This wasn't a diplomatic visit, it was a retrieval force. The void-touched researchers reacted immediately, moving with that eerie synchronization Aurora had described. Lord Thaddeus took position beside his wife, their combined power creating a palpable pressure in the room. They didn't attack, but they positioned themselves strategically, creating layers of protection between the Starweaver forces and their gathering. The temperature in the room plummeted as competing magical energies built toward critical mass. Chen stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Aurora.
By order of Lord Aldrin Starweaver, head of the main line, you are commanded to return immediately for assessment and treatment. Your corruption has progressed beyond acceptable parameters.
I haven't fallen to corruption,
Aurora replied, but I could hear the strain in her voice. She was powerful, but against 7 trained Starweaver guards?
I've evolved beyond the limitations you tried to impose.
The distinction is irrelevant,
Chen said flatly. He raised his hand, and the guards spread into a containment formation I recognized from our lessons, the 7-pointed star, designed specifically to neutralize void-touched individuals.
You will come with us, willingly or otherwise.
Lady Ravenna laughed, the sound like breaking crystal.
You dare threaten violence on neutral ground? The other families will hear of this violation.
The other families,
Chen interrupted,
support the containment of void corruption wherever it's found. Your outdated claims of neutrality won't protect you if you interfere with lawful family business.
Lawful?
Thaddeus stepped forward, his form solidifying as anger replaced analysis.
There is nothing lawful about suppressing evolution. Nothing just about fearing progress.
The power radiating from him made it clear that despite his scholarly demeanor, he was every bit as dangerous as his wife. The Void researchers were moving now, their own magic building in response to the guards' formation. I could feel the energies spiraling toward violence, could see how this would end in blood and destruction that would shatter the fragile peace between families.
Aurora, I said urgently, grabbing her arm. Please, come with us. If you fight here, people will die. Our people, their people. Is your research worth that?
She looked at me, those transformed eyes swirling with conflict.
They'll cage me. Perform purification rituals that will destroy everything I've discovered, everything I've become.
We'll find another way, I promised desperately. I'll advocate for you, protect you, but not like this, not through violence.
How touching.
Ravenna interjected, her own power building visibly around her.
But Lady Aurora is under my protection now. The Starweavers have no authority here.
She's under our protection.
Thaddeus corrected, moving to flank Aurora's other side.
The protection of House Nightrose, and all who seek truth over comfortable lies.
Then we'll take her by force.
Chen said simply. The guards began their spell in unison, 7 voices speaking words of binding and containment. The Void researchers responded with their own workings, reality warping and bending as incompatible magical systems clashed. Lord Thaddeus began weaving something complex, his birthmark flaring as he pulled on deep void energies.
Stop! I shouted, but my voice was lost in the building chaos.
Aurora stood at the center of it all, her form flickering between states as she prepared to unleash her integrated power. I could see her making the calculation she could probably fight her way free. But at what cost? How many would die in the crossfire?
Aurora, please, I begged, tears streaming down my face. I know you don't trust them. I know you think they'll destroy you. But I swear on Mother's memory, I won't let that happen. Come with us. Choose family over this.
She turned to me, and for a moment I saw my sister not, the transformed being drunk on void power, but the girl who had created constellations to help me sleep.
You promise? You'll protect me?
She asked, her voice small.
Always, I swore. Sun and moon, remember? I won't let them hurt you.
The magical energies in the room had reached a breaking point. In seconds, violence would erupt. Aurora looked around at the Void researchers ready to die for her, at Lady Ravenna, whose smile promised terrible retribution, at Lord Thaddeus, whose protective stance spoke of genuine care beneath the manipulation, at the family guards who saw her as nothing but corruption to be cleansed. Then she looked at me, her little sister, begging her to choose safety over revolution.
I'm sorry,
she whispered, though I wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Then, louder.
I'll come.
The building energies paused, everyone processing this unexpected surrender.
Aurora, no.
Ravenna said sharply.
You're throwing away everything for family that will never understand you.
Thaddeus's expression was more complex disappointment mixed with something that might have been respect.
The offer remains open. When you're ready to embrace what you're becoming rather than letting others diminish it, you'll find us waiting.
I'm choosing my sister.
Aurora replied, moving to stand beside me.
For now.
The guards maintained their formation as we moved toward them, clearly not trusting this sudden compliance. Chen's expression showed grim satisfaction mixed with wariness.
A wise choice. The family will
remember that I came willingly.
Aurora interrupted, steel in her voice despite her surrender.
That I chose to avoid bloodshed. Lysandra has given her word that I'll be protected, and as heir to the main line, her word binds the family. Doesn't it, Master Chen?
Chen's jaw tightened, but he nodded.
The heir's word carries weight, yes.
Then let's go,
Aurora said, taking my hand. Her skin was cold, vibrating with suppressed power, but her grip was steady.
Before anyone does something that can't be undone.
As we moved toward the exit, flanked by guards who watched Aurora like she might explode at any moment, Lady Ravenna called out.
This isn't over, Aurora. The truth about your mother's death doesn't vanish simply because you choose comfortable lies. When you're ready to hear it, truly ready, you know where to find us.
Lord Thaddeus added more quietly, but his words carried clearly through the tense air.
And remember, transformation isn't corruption. Evolution isn't falling. No matter what they tell you in the purification chambers, you are not broken. You are becoming.
Aurora's hand tightened on mine, but she didn't look back. We left the observatory as dawn broke across the sky, 7 guards forming a protective or imprisoning circle around us as we began the journey back to the estate. Thank you, I whispered to Aurora as we walked. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was carefully neutral.
I hope you understand what you've done, what you've promised. Because when they try to purify me, and they will try, I'll hold you to your word.
I won't let them hurt you, I repeated.
Hurt is relative,
she said quietly.
To them, leaving me as I am is hurt. To me, changing me back is hurt. You've placed yourself between irreconcilable positions.
She was right, but I couldn't think about that now. All that mattered was that we'd avoided violence, that Aurora had chosen family over the Void researchers, that we were going home together. The journey back was tense. Guards maintaining vigilant watch while Aurora sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, her power carefully contained. I held her hand the entire way, anchor and jailer both, wondering if I'd saved my sister or simply delayed an inevitable confrontation. But at least she was with me. At least she'd chosen to come home. That had to count for something. Even if the vile Lady Ravenna had tried to give her that promise of truth about Mother's death remained behind, a temptation that would gnaw at Aurora for who knew how long. Even if the Void researchers now saw the Starweaver family as enemies who had stolen one of their own. Even if I'd made promises I wasn't sure I could keep. At least, for now, my sister was coming home. As we were escorted from the observatory, I could feel the weight of what had just transpired. The Void researchers watched our departure with expressions ranging from disappointment to barely suppressed rage. Aurora had been their hope, their proof that integration could work, and now she was being taken back to face possible purification. Master Chen rode beside our carriage, the guards maintaining their formation even during travel. Aurora sat rigid beside me, her eyes closed, every line of her body speaking of barely contained power and emotion.
I'm proud of you, I whispered, squeezing her hand.
Her eyes opened, those impossible depths focusing on me with an intensity that made me shiver.
Are you? I just betrayed everyone in that room who believed in me, who saw me as validation of their own transformations.
You prevented bloodshed, I said. You chose family.
I chose you, because you begged me, because I couldn't bear to see you caught in the crossfire. But they were right about Mother, about everything. And now I may never learn the full truth.
I thought of the vile Lady Ravenna had tried to give Aurora that promise of answers that had remained behind when we fled. Whatever manipulative truth it contained, at least Aurora hadn't taken it with her. That was one temptation removed, even if the questions it promised to answer would continue to gnaw at her. The truth won't help if you're dead or purified beyond recognition, I argued. We'll find another way to get answers. A safer way. Aurora's laugh was bitter.
There is no safe way to challenge the established order. Mother learned that. I'm learning it now.
The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. When we finally arrived at the estate, Father was waiting in the main courtyard, his face a mask of controlled emotion. The dawn light made him look older, the lines of grief and worry etched deeply into his features.
Aurora, welcome home,
he said, as we emerged from the carriage.
Ami? Or am I a prisoner?
She asked, her voice carefully neutral.
You're my daughter.
Father said firmly.
And you're ill. We're going to help you.
I don't need help. I need understanding.
Then help us understand,
Father said, and there was genuine pain in his voice.
Help us see what you see without losing yourself to it.
Aurora looked at me, and I saw the moment she remembered my promise that I wouldn't let them hurt her, that I would protect her. The trust in her eyes was almost worse than accusation would have been.
Lysandra has given her word that I'll be treated fairly, that any treatments or interventions will be explained and agreed upon. The heir's word binds the family, doesn't it, Father?
Aurora said, loud enough for all the assembled guards and family members to hear. Father's gaze shifted to me, and I saw surprise, calculation, and something that might have been disappointment flash across his features. But he nodded slowly.
The heir's word carries great weight. Though I trust Lysandra understands the gravity of what she's promised.
I did understand. I had placed myself between Aurora and the family, guaranteeing a protection I might not be able to provide. But what else could I have done? Let violence erupt? Watch my sister fight a battle that would have ended in tragedy regardless of who won? I understand, I said, meeting Father's gaze steadily. Aurora came willingly. She deserves to be heard, not condemned without trial.
Then we'll hear her.
Father said.
Tomorrow before the family council. She can present her research, her reasoning, her perspective, and then we'll determine the best path forward.
It was more than I had dared hope for. Aurora would have a chance to explain herself, to make her case. Maybe, somehow, we could find a middle ground between her transformation and the family's need for stability. As Aurora was escorted to her chambers, not the starlight chamber I noted with relief, but her own rooms, she paused beside me.
Thank you for believing in me enough to make that promise. Even if you don't believe my theories about Mother,
She said softly. We embraced each other. I believe in you, I said. That has to be enough for now. She smiled sadly.
I hope it is, for both our sakes.
As I watched her disappear into the manor, flanked by guards who were protectors or jailers depending on perspective, I wondered what tomorrow would bring. The family council would not be easily swayed. Aurora's transformation was visible, undeniable. Her association with the Night Rose and Void researchers was now known. But she had come home. She had chosen family, chosen me, over the seductive whispers of the Void touched, that had to count for something. Even if a small, treacherous part of me wondered whether I had saved my sister or simply delayed an inevitable tragedy. Even if I suspected that my promise to protect her would be tested in ways I couldn't yet imagine. And somewhere in that abandoned observatory, Lady Ravenna still held the vial that promised to reveal the truth about Mother's death. Would she send it to Aurora somehow? Would Aurora seek it out despite the risks? The temptation of answers, even manipulated ones, would be hard for my sister to resist. The winter my mother died, everything changed. And as I stood in the dawn light, watching the estate wake to a new day that would bring new challenges, I knew the changes were far from over. Tomorrow, Aurora would stand before the family and try to make them understand her transformation. Tomorrow, I would stand beside her and try to bridge the gap between tradition and evolution. Tomorrow, we would learn whether my promise could hold against the weight of centuries of fear and tradition. Tonight, at least, my sister was home. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, something has to be enough.